Hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to be talking about my editing process. Many of y'all have asked me how exactly I go about editing my novels. Now, this is the process that happens once your book is a full manuscript. You have typed the end, it is all there, it is all done, it's written, all that good stuff. Once you get to that point, then the editing process begins. And now I know there are people who kind of do an edit as they go while writing. You still want to have a separate editing process once the manuscript is all said and done. Trust me on that. It's going to make for a more polished product and ensure that publishers take you seriously when you start doing submissions. Let's get into it. Step one in my editing process is what I call my big edits. What this means is that I am basically going over the story in terms of, are there any plot holes? Does everything make sense? Do the character motivations make sense? Did I address character development? Does the overall arc of the plot make sense? All that good stuff. I know this sounds like obvious is obvious, but a big thing that I personally struggle with, and I know plenty of other authors struggle with, is making sure that you get everything out of your head and get it on the page. You know what happens in the story, but that doesn't necessarily mean you put it all on the paper. Go through the story, and when I say go through it, I mean actually sit there with your manuscript and read it. Actually read it. Make sure everything makes sense. Make sure all of your big pieces are there, all the plot points are there, all that good stuff. Whether you need to add scenes, move scenes, delete scenes, all of that. Make sure all of that is taken care of. I usually do between 1 to 3 rounds of big edits before I move on to step 2 of my process. Doing multiple rounds of edits also helps you to catch mistakes in your writing, because doing just a once-over on your manuscript and calling it done, there's likely going to be a lot that you miss. Make sure that you're doing multiple rounds of edits on your manuscript. Step 2 is what I like to call my fine edits or my small edits. What this means is going over with a fine-tooth comb and making sure there's no spelling, grammar, teeny tiny little errors, stuff like that. I forgot a period here, I forgot an apostrophe, this is spelled wrong, all that nitty-gritty stuff. This is that part of the process that I do. A big way to be able to catch these mistakes, because if you just sit and read, especially if you read on a screen as opposed to a hard copy, your brain kind of autocorrects while you read. My biggest tip, print it out, have a hard copy, and actually read it out loud. It is one of the easiest way to catch all of the little mistakes that you made. Sit there and read it. And trust me, you're going to have to read it multiple times. That's why the big joke is, if you don't hate your story now, sure gonna hate it by the time you're done editing it. Oh, being a writer is a love-hate relationship, y'all. It really, truly is. Make sure that you read over it multiple times, going over with that red pen and making sure you catch all those silly little mistakes, because those little silly mistakes can really mean the difference between a yes or a no from a publisher. Because finding, 1 or 2 typos is not a big deal, but if there's just tons of typos on your first page of your manuscript, your publisher is not going to take you seriously and they're going to reject you, because that tells them that you're not taking your manuscript seriously. So why should they take your manuscript seriously? Make sure you do yourself that favor so that you don't waste your time or the publisher's time. Step 3. Once you have done all of that, read it again. I know this sounds like at this point you have read it so many times. Why would you possibly read it again? Oh my goodness. This is just so much reading. Trust me, read it one more time. You would be surprised at how much stuff you can find on the last reading of your manuscript with this process. Once you get past that last reading, I highly suggest, whether you have beta readers or you have an editor that you've hired, have someone else read your story at least once. at the very least to get some feedback from other people, it's really, really super helpful. It's also way more helpful to have people read your manuscript after you've done all of these edits, because then they're going to be more focused on the story itself rather than getting bogged down in a lot of the little annoying typos and things that are really distracting like that, so that you can get the real feedback actually going to be valuable to you rather than just all the annoying stuff that a line editor could just pick out for you. And if you have the money and the capability to just hand off your manuscript as is to an editor or a team of editors, go you. Honestly, it is a lot easier as an author if you have a team that you can rely on and have them help you do some of the heavy lifts. So there is nothing wrong with if you farm out for other people to do the editing process for you as opposed to doing it yourself or doing some combination of the two. Absolutely do that. There is no wrong way, whether it's you do it by yourself, have someone help you, have somebody do all the work, whatever. Whatever works best for you and your story, do it. Just make sure that the process that you're using goes over it multiple times and make sure that it is absolutely as polished as it possibly could be before sending it off to the publisher. That being said, I also do know authors who struggle with the manuscript that is never done. The whole trap of that you can just edit infinitely. That's why I only have 1 to 3 rounds for this step. I only have 1 to 3 rounds for this step. I make sure that I have a cap on how much editing I'm allowed to do, because otherwise you can honestly spend years infinitely editing a manuscript and then to you it's never ready to be sent out to a publisher. There is a point with editing your manuscript that you just have to say, you know what, it's done. Chefs, put your tools down, hands up, and hand it off to be judged. There does come a step where you just have to do that. Just do as much as you can, be confident in what you've done, and just come what may, honestly, at that point. Because at that point, I can guarantee you, there's not going to be all that silly sloppiness. You don't have to worry about that in terms of response from the publisher. At that point, it's really going to be fine tuning and they're going to assign an editor to you to take care of that stuff anyway. So don't worry too much about that. That is the core of my editing process. Now to get a little bit more specific, depending on the story that I'm working on and my goals with it, I will also do other editing techniques with my story in addition to those techniques that I just mentioned. The first one is the highlighter method. I learned this method from my professor and mentor, Tina Jens, while I was at Columbia College, Chicago. What this process is where you have to print out your manuscript and you have a rainbow of highlighters. And you can actually look this up online. There is actually a website that does detail out this process. But basically, it's where you take these different highlighters and each color is assigned to a story element. So like blue is for dialogue, yellow is for prose, on and on. Basically, each color is a different part of the story. And you want to go through and you want to highlight these different parts of your manuscript. And basically what you want to end up with is a rainbow. You want to make sure that you don't just have one big block of color or, God forbid, one big page of color, because what that usually means is you have, an entire block of like just dialogue or just prose. You want to make sure that all of this is varied throughout your story. That's how you keep a story interesting, because otherwise you fall into the traps of the narrator, or characters may as well be in a snow globe or talking heads, all that kind of stuff where you're ignoring your environment or you're not describing action, or the narrator is telling the whole story and nothing's actually happening, or people are just talking and you don't necessarily know who's talking or what's actually going on in the world. In order to avoid these pitfalls, doing the highlighter method really helps you to be more aware of these chunks, so that then you can add in those details as needed, whether you need to add in more dialogue or more action or more details, whatever the case may be. This is a really good exercise for helping you to visually recognize that in your novel. Another really good method is the 5 senses method, is to make sure that your novel is engaging and that you really are paying attention to the environment, because a lot of times people concentrate most on the prose, the dialogue, and the action, and they oftentimes forget about the actual world that this story is taking place in. So doing the 5 senses really can help bring your story to the next level. And what this means is with each scene, Ask yourself, what are my characters physically feeling? Is it cold? Is it hot? Are there any smells? Are they outside? Are they in a musty factory? What are they seeing? What does the area look like that they're in? What are they hearing? Are they outside and they hear ducks? Are they inside and there's a bunch of computers and phones going off? Ask yourself these things. If they're sitting down to a meal, what are they eating? What does it taste like? Is it a very unpleasant experience? Characters on a bad date, so everything just tastes sour in their mouth because they're so disgusted with their date. Are they having a sumptuous banquet and everything is just exquisitely delicious? Tell that. Readers love to read details like that. And I know that a lot of modern self-help sort of books with writing and all that are telling everybody to cut everything that's not necessary to the story and blah 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 and all that. There's been a lot of pushback from that because a lot of people take that a wee bit too literally, and then you end up with a very cut and dry story where it's literally 100% just action. And there's no actual details that actually ground you in the world of the story. And when I say the world of the story, that applies to literally any genre, not just fantasy. World building isn't just for fantasy, it's for literally every single story. You have to build this world that these characters live in. Whether you want to go as wide shot or as close shot as you want with that, you still have to describe to the reader what exactly this world is that these characters are existing in and why the reader should care about them. This isn't just a movie of boom, explosions, and running around. You have to actually describe things. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that with your readers by using that editing process. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I've also used the post-it method. This is very, very good for organizing your story. So what I did is I took post-it notes and I went through my manuscript and I wrote down every single scene in the story. So basically, anytime that they enter a different room, they enter a different space, a different character's point of view, it's the next day, whatever. Write each scene on a post-it note. And just something simple. You don't have to write a whole paragraph on a post-it note, just a little note of what's happening in the story. And then I put it all on my wall, just a huge line of all these post-it notes so that I could see kind of the zoomed out version of my manuscript. And from there, I was able to see, okay, does this order of events make sense? Are there any plot holes here that I need to fill in? Are there any scenes that just really aren't necessary or are repetitive? Seeing that really can help you determine those things, and you can also so much easier pick them up and move them around accordingly so that you can maybe rearrange where scenes are in the story. It's a lot easier to do that than to try to move things around physically in your actual manuscript. I highly recommend that process as well. And last but not least, a technique that I think is very important, because I have seen that a lot of people also struggle with writing realistic dialogue, and when they read their manuscript back, some of the dialogue can sound canned or stilted. Go out anywhere, any public place, and just listen to people talk. Just listen to people talk, even if you're writing about a different world or a different time period or whatever. The way people talk is still the same, just the way that people interact with each other. Listen to the way that people actually talk. Take notes and then take that back to your story. Because a lot of times, sometimes we try to kind of force the narrator voice through our character dialogue in order to tell the reader things. And that's a big part of the problem in making your dialogue sound really canned and stilted. Take that step back and listen to some actual human beings having a conversation to kind of give you that reminder of how real living people really do talk and interact with each other. Doing that can really help be a palate cleanser and get you back into, well, what would my character actually say in this situation? What would they actually say to character A or character B? How would they actually interact rather than me just using them as a way to push the plot along? Make sure that things sound realistic, because there are so many different ways that you can help move the plot forward without basically making your characters be a narrator mouthpiece, because your reader will notice and it'll just seem really weird. So do yourself that favor and make sure that people actually sound like they're talking in your story. These are a lot of the editing techniques that I use in my stories. I hope this has been helpful for y'all. These are, of course, based on my personal experiences and the experiences of people that I know personally. If y'all have any editing processes or tips and tricks that y'all like to use, please do leave them in the comments below. And I hope y'all enjoyed watching this. Thank y'all so much. Take care. Bye bye.